This week's Torah portion, Shemini, speaks of all of the animals that are kosher and those that are not kosher and so on. And there's this incredible insight from the Rebbe contained in this selection of the Rebbe's talks, selection of Likutei Siches. Let me actually read it to you. The Rambam, Maimonides, writes concerning items that one should not eat because they're disgusting to the human spirit. The Rambam makes the following statement. Whoever scrupulously observes these matters stays away from things that are loathsome or disgusting, brings additional measure of holiness and purity to his soul and purges his soul for the sake of the Holy One, blessed be He. Let's say that again. When you are careful in these matters and you avoid things that are loathsome or disgusting, what does that do? It brings an additional holiness and purity, which purges his soul for the sake of the Holy One, blessed be He. So we have here three things. Holiness, in this case, additional holiness. Then we have purity. And then we have the purging of the soul for the sake of the Holy One, blessed be He. These three things, the purging of the soul, the purity of the soul, and the holiness of the soul, are worded in different places by different sages in reverse order. What comes first? Well, you would think the purging, meaning getting rid of the dirt, cleaning up, that should be the first thing. That will lead to purity, innocence, and that purity will lead to holiness. But here, the Rambam presents it in the reverse order. First, there's an additional holiness, and that leads to purity, and that leads to purging the soul. Seems backwards. So here's what the Rebbe's observation is. Seemingly, Rambam's source is from the verse. It is written, "You shall sanctify yourself and you will be holy," that appears directly after the prohibition, "Do not make your souls loathsome." Don't do things that are distasteful to the human soul. Which means that we are obligated to sanctify ourselves because that serves as the motivating rationale for the prohibition against loathsome conduct. This follows the theme expressed by the beginning of the verse, "I am God your Lord, and you shall sanctify yourself." And we need to understand this very fundamental question. The Torah says, do not eat certain foods because they're disgusting. Like swarming things, things without legs that swarm on their bellies across the earth. Don't eat those things because they're loathsome. The question is, if something is loathsome, why do you need to be told not to eat it? You're saying it's disgusting to the person by nature, to people. So then why the prohibition? Now, it wouldn't work to assume that the Torah is talking to those exceptional people who don't find disgusting things disgusting. And so they have to be told not to eat those things. But the sages come along and add many more things to the list of what is loathsome. In fact, there is a prohibition on the individual. If you're an exception, you're the only one who finds a certain behavior really distasteful and loathsome, you should not do it. The sages tell you it is forbidden for you to disgust yourself or to lower yourself into behavior that your nature, your system, your constitution rebels against. You know, there are people who have certain sensitivities. They find the sound of chewing really distasteful. There's actually a law in the laws of etiquette that when you're eating at a table with other people, don't take a bite out of a fruit or item, a food item, because the bitten part of the food can be very distasteful or upsetting to others. So cut off a piece and swallow it, but don't take a bite out of a larger food that leaves the bitten section exposed. Don't offer someone a drink from your cup after you've used the cup, after you drink from it. Some people can be... So even if you're strange, you have a sensitivity that nobody else has. If you find it disgusting, don't do it. So the question is, if it's that disgusting, why does the Torah have to forbid it? Obviously, you're not going to do it. In fact, the Rambam mentions that all of this is done, the additional holiness, the purity, and the purging of the soul is all done for the sake of God. Here's what the Rebbe says. How do you know whether you're serving God absolutely sincerely? No matter which mitzvah you do, is there any evidence that you're doing it for God? If the mitzvah is enjoyable, can you say that you're doing it only for God and not for the enjoyment that you get from it? Whether the enjoyment is physical, whether it's spiritual, even godly. Knowing that you're doing something godly, well, that's appealing in and of itself. Even when you do a mitzvah that you don't want to do. But knowing that God wants you to do it, you disregard your own desire and you do what God wants. But can you say that there's no selfish motivation in that? Can't you be a martyr and be arrogant about it? You actually give up your life out of arrogance? And no one is going to make me do anything I don't want to do. You can kill me, but I ain't going to do it. Is that purely for the sake of God? It may be, but there's no evidence. How is one supposed to know? But imagine if there's something that you find absolutely loathsome, nauseating, but you don't do it because God asked you not to, because the sages say you shouldn't do it. Boy, that's really selfless, if you can do that. So here's what Rambam is saying. Rambam is saying, if you avoid things that you naturally find disgusting. But you do it because that's what the Torah, that's what God asks you to do. That's a whole different level of serving God. So, briefly, here's how it works. There are, in fact, two approaches. One is cleanliness is next to godliness. That's why the guy wanted to open a synagogue next to the dry cleaner. Because the first thing you have to do is get rid of the dirt. Stop doing things that are unholy and wicked. That should be your first step. Stop corrupting yourself. Then you can move on to better and higher levels of decency. So the first thing is physical cleanliness. Physical cleanliness puts you in mind, at least, for internal cleanliness. Physical is the external. So a person who is careful about external cleanliness, I don't mean obsessive about it, which is a whole different problem, but for example, a child at a very young age should be encouraged, should be made aware. You know, when your clothing are dirty, you go and change them. You don't walk around in dirty clothing. A child should develop a sensitivity where they feel uncomfortable with being dirty or soiled, or whether it's the body or the clothing. A child should have a feeling for cleanliness. That's external, of course. But it is very helpful in a spiritual life because the physical cleanliness kind of reminds you or suggests, however subtly, that there is also spiritual cleanliness. In fact, Rambam actually defines it that way. What is purity? And what is holiness? What is purging the soul? He says purging the soul means getting rid of the dirt. Spiritually, that means unholy desires. Don't want things. Don't have an appetite for things that are not innocent or not good. What is purity? Step up. Purity means thought. So cleanliness spiritually means clean emotion. Purity means cleanliness or purity of thought. Like, for example, a person would avoid an unholy relationship. And the thought behind it, which is good emotion, clean emotion, but the thought behind it is, I'm too good for that. That's not pure intention. So purity means purity of thought, and cleanliness means cleanliness of emotion on the spiritual level. At any rate, cleanliness physically, the external cleanliness, obviously is a step towards spiritual cleanliness in emotion and in thought. Once you get to cleanliness, which means your heart and mind are pure, then you can move on to holiness, where you're actually serving God. So the cleanliness and the purity are self-improvement. You're actually preparing yourself to be capable and worthy of serving God. And then you serve God. That's your holiness. Here the Rebbe says, the Rambam is trying to tell you something much deeper. What about a person whose emotions are pure and his thoughts are pure? What he needs is more holiness. So here Rambam says the following. If you avoid things that you find disgusting, you will add additional holiness, which will lead to purity, which will lead to purging yourself of things that are ugly. How does that work? This is something we really need to apply to our own lives. Why do we find certain things disgusting? What is that impulse? Well, there is this natural distinction between animal and human. We don't create it, it's there, it's natural. There are certain things a human being wouldn't do, which animals do. And the reason we wouldn't do it is simply because we're human. And the thought of doing this whatever act it is means I'm acting like an animal. My system won't allow it. It goes against the definition of what I am. Not arrogance, not better than any other human, but the human condition doesn't allow me to step into the animal world and behave like an animal. We find that distasteful, meaning inappropriate for a human. For example, eating a limb from a living animal. The thought of it is nauseating. Cannibalism. Do you know that nowhere in the Torah does it say you're not allowed to eat human flesh? Because it goes under the category of don't do things that disgust you. So why is it that a human being is disgusted by the thought of cannibalism, but animals eat animals and fish eat fish? Well, that's exactly why. Because animals do that, the human condition rebels. I'm not an animal. The thought of drinking blood. Animals do that. The human spirit rebels against it. What does that tell us? How is the cleanliness leading me to holiness? It's actually the holiness that makes me rebel against things that are disgusting. Or that's why I find things disgusting. The reason I find certain things distasteful is because I am holy. Holier than an animal. A refined person, a truly sensitive human being, finds things that others are perfectly comfortable with. The sensitive person, the refined person, finds those things so distasteful that it's loathsome. So, which way are we functioning? Are we starting with external cleanliness, which will inspire internal cleanliness, which will make us holy? Or does it work the opposite way? If you are in fact holy, you're thinking godly, then you're going to find certain things that are not pure enough. They're not selfless enough. Your thinking is too arrogant, too self-aware. It wouldn't bother you if you hadn't become so holy. But it's because you're holy that now that thinking is disturbing. I mean, look at society today. If you say to somebody, "Whoa, that was a little egotistical," so, "Oh, that's selfish behavior." Right. I got to take care of myself first. I come first. Yes, exactly right. They don't find that distasteful at all. Even husbands and wives do things to hurt each other, and it's justified because that's what I am, that's who I am, that's what I think, that's what I feel, that's what I need. So I do it. Yeah, but it's hurting your spouse. Well, they're going to have to find a way to live with it. Children breaking their parents' hearts by rebelling and strange behavior. And then they demand that the parents have to love them unconditionally, accept them, and be proud of whatever it is they turn out to be. And there's no shame. So this notion, avoid things that are loathsome to you, how do we get things to be loathsome? Of course, there are those things that are naturally distasteful. That's external, and you work your way up from there. I won't do disgusting things. I won't walk around filthy. That will help me clean up my internal behavior and so on. And that might lead me to some holiness, meaning if I avoid the distasteful, if I refine what's going on inside of me, maybe I'll even be selfless enough to serve you, to put you first in a good relationship, or to put God first. Or we work the other way. So the Rambam in this particular case is speaking about people who are highly refined. And because they're highly refined, they find things distasteful that others see nothing wrong with. They're functioning on a higher level. So here you have holiness first, then comes purity of intention, and then comes the cleanliness of the emotion or of the behavior. So as the holiness increases, meaning the closer you are to God and focused on serving Him, well, if you're serving Him, then more things become distasteful. Things that ordinary people accept as maybe an inevitable part of nature or life. We have all these stories about the Rebbe who was so sensitive to words that suggest anything negative. My mother and people of her generation would be horrified, literally horrified, if I ever said, "Ma, I'm cold." Horrified. A living being is never cold. Cold sounds cadaverous. Don't ever say that. Say it's chilly in the room. Say I feel the cold. The cold wind bothers me. Never say I'm cold. You know anybody who's bothered by that? Anybody who gets upset about that? But the more alive a person is, the more distasteful he finds any reference to death. This is why a person who's truly serving God can also be humble. Because they can't possibly think they're great. As they get more holy, all of a sudden more activity, more thoughts, more feelings become distasteful. They find something in themselves that is abhorrent, loathsome. Wouldn't bother anybody else, but it bothers them. And so as they get more holy, they get more sensitive. As they get more sensitive, they find more things about themselves that they can't tolerate. Like any selfish impulse. A famous chassid once bemoaned the fact that when his child passed away, you shouldn't know of it, he cried and mourned and grieved much more than when his neighbor's child passed away. And he found that horrific. How can you call yourself a human being if that's how you feel? For your child, you cry more than for someone else's child. So really, is it about life? Is it about goodness? Or is it about you? He found that unacceptable within himself. So you see, you can't get arrogant by becoming holy. So those who are holy and arrogant, you got to question the holiness. Can't be real. So, conclusion. If you can avoid things that you are naturally turned off to, and you avoid them because God said not to, now we know you're starting with holiness. And therefore, the things you find distasteful are going to be much more subtle, much more sensitive than the average person. And that's why there's holiness first. That makes you more sensitive. So now you find certain feelings unacceptable. You find certain thoughts unacceptable. And they even feel so dirty that you need to purge your soul of it. Now, purging is used in medical terminology. Purging means literally you can't keep it inside and it has to come out. Regurgitating. That even the body is rebelling against it and wants it out. It's poison. That's called the purging. So the person who is holy will purge himself of things that other people actually enjoy. But that's the sign of human improvement. The human in you is becoming more human. And therefore, anything that in any way suggests animal behavior makes you find it repulsive. And therefore, it's not going to happen. So tzaddikim are not capable of sin because to them it's repulsive. Even their body rebels against it.